Okay, I think we're ready to start again. So thank you and welcome to this second part of this webinar. We will now move into the more practical side of the session, and we will start and we will talk about the tools and techniques with some live walkthroughs. First, Elena will talk about the mapping assistant and use of that. And then David will give an introduction to the matrix generator and a demo of that to really put in practice what you heard during the first part of this session. Again, if you have questions, please post them in the chat or raise hand feature, and we'll take those at the end of this session. So we have 1 hour to go, and I'll hand over to Elena. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Jonathan. Turn on my video here. Hello. So I will put on my, oops. No. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the mapping assistant and how we use this as a tool for the to migrate some data sets from version 7 to .stat to the .stat suite version 8. I just want to mention that this was something actually that we were trying to look for a way to map data sets, and in particular I'm going to show an example of a national accounts data set. We're going from just a few dimensions to a lot of dimensions. There's complicated mappings, and Yuri suggested, why don't you try Mapping Assistant? I was a little hesitant, but it turns out to actually be a really efficient tool in doing these sort of mappings. We already had Mapping Assistant configured with .stat 7 for creating data messages using the national accounts global DSD to send to Eurostat and the ECB. So since this was already configured, it was a readily available tool that I could use. And it basically, I mean, for the example I'm going to show, I haven't had any problems yet, and I haven't found any restrictions in mapping. It's been able to do all the mappings that I want. So it's actually been a really great tool. But unfortunately, it's a temporary solution because what it's doing is it's taking data sets that are still updated on version 7 and translating them to the data structures that we want, that we can then upload those data messages into the DLM of .stat suite. So when version 7 is no longer updated, this is going to be, we're going to have to find another solution. So we're looking at, for future, what can we do with these mappings that we've created in a mapping assistant? Can we possibly export them and use them in EDD mapping files or etc. So the first step, so I'm going to go over an example of from the National Accounts Main Aggregates Table 0101. This is just one data flow that we created. So I just want to show how I used Mapping Assistant to get data and for this one data flow to then upload. So first, in Mapping Assistant, you have to add the data structures that you want. Now, a little contrary to what Anastasia said, the agency is actually us. We have taken the National Accounts Global DSD, but we've made a slight change. because we have a data flow that contains all the national accounts main aggregates, and to do this, we had to make a few changes. I can go more into that later, but maybe I should just go with the example here. So the agency is us, and then we have ID, national accounts main aggregates, and the version number. So that's the first step, is adding the structures into Mapping Assistant. The second step is to add a new category scheme for national accounts, and then the category NAMAIN, and then the data flow. So the next step is looking for the data set, finding the data set in version 7, and then creating an SQL query using that data set. It's a little, there's a little bit of SQL logic added to this query, just because we wanted to make the mapping a little bit easier, and this is just creating an extra dimension that didn't exist in the actual data set. And then the last, or not the last step, but the last step in the Mapping Assistant is to create the mappings. And we used CSV files because there's quite a bit of dimensions and dimension members. So you can actually upload CSV files and go through all the different local codes here, and all the dimensions, map them to all the dimensions in the structure that you want, the data structure that you want. So I won't go into too much detail there. And the last part is to use the test client. And the test client is going to help you discover the query that you want to get the data. You can take a subset of the data, or you can take the whole data set if that's what you want. And the selections I made in test client were SDMX ML 2.1 generic, REST compatible query, dimension and observation time period, and then we get this query here that we can then use to get the data in a data message and in the data structure that we want, and upload this to the DLM. So I think that's it for mine. So I went a little fast there, so I don't know if there's any questions. I have to stop sharing.
No, thank you, Elena. There's, oh yeah, okay. So there's one question that's just come in. Will you plan to fully integrate the mapping system in .stat suite?
Well, sorry, I don't think. Well, maybe Yuri can explain better, but I don't think we don't need to do it for all of the data sets. First of all, we can use other tools, and this is really just to help us migrate. And once version 7 is no longer updated, we won't really be able to use Mapping Assistant, as far as I know. So this is kind of like a temporary solution, but it's a very efficient solution right now to kind of get us started and help us map the very big data sets. I hope that answered your question.
Yuri, you want to go say something? I think your mic open.
Yes, I just wanted to say that, yes, as Elena said, just look at the mapping assistant, at least in this workflow, as a temporary tool, as a bridging tool to get quickly data that is in line with global DSDs into the system. It's a quick way, and also it has the advantage of being always live. So, and we can reuse many of these mappings in our data exchange exercises with Eurostat and ECB, or at least the mappings that we generate here are very similar to those. So there's a reuse in many directions. Also, one of the advantages of this mechanism is that it handles many-to-one mappings, which other systems, I mean, many dimensions to one dimension type mappings, which in other systems we were struggling and had to do lots of preparatory work. So that was the motivation. I'm not 100% up to date with the data model review of the new .stat suite. I think there is a possibility that this kind of mapping assistant based scenarios will become more prevalent once the new .stat suite takes the plain vanilla NSI web service. But I think if you have very specific technical questions in relation to that, that's better addressed to the solution teams or to the solution team, because at the moment we are not planning anything with the mapping assistant on the V8 side.
Thank you, Yuri. There's another question around the mapping assistant as well. We're using mapping assistant to export data from V7 repository, and it could be used successfully also to expose data flows. Data could be consumed by DE. We have a big issue and want to know how you're dealing with. So how can you extract attributes in V7 like our implementation? There could be several attributes attached at different levels.
Yeah, in our source data, we don't really have attributes. So as you could see, the tweaking on the database level in Alena's example was to inject an attribute into the source data, but it's as with all temporary solutions, it's a hard-coded example. It wouldn't work in a full long-term production system. But to support the migration, yes, you could kind of introduce simpler attribute lists into the system like this.
Okay, thank you. There's no more questions in the chat, so we'll move forward and with David's presentation and demonstration of the matrix generator.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, please go ahead, David.
Okay, so I'll share my screen. Okay, so yeah, just to check, can you see my screen okay?
Yes. Yes, thank you, David.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about two main aspects. One is the remodeling process of the tourism datasets. So there'll be a little bit of duplication from what Anastasia was explaining. And the other one is to show this in the context of using the SDMX matrix generator, which has also been referred to. So first of all, just to a slide about the tool itself. So the purpose of this tool, why we created it, is to allow the statisticians to easily create this dataset-oriented structures, and without knowing a great deal about SDMX. So the idea is to hide the SDMX technicalities, and they don't need to know about the information model really. It was inspired by the global DSD design work groups where I was, and some other people on the call were as well, where we were using this kind of Excel matrix to design the structures. And we saw that statisticians sat around the table. We could discuss around this this kind of design in Excel, and they could understand, how things were split up into DSDs and data flows, and what was a concept, etc., to come up with a decent structure. So what the matrix generator does is principally to add the functional part, which is to allow the generation of SDMX, so it can be uploaded into tools like .stat, like the global registry, and other SDMX tools. So it's an open source tool. It's hosted on GitHub. I have the links here in the PowerPoint that will be distributed afterwards, and there's a user guide as well. So the basic template that is on GitHub already contains the cross-domain concepts that you may want to use in data structures, but of course you can add to those. This is the idea. Recently, it's gone through several iterations, the design of it, but recently a big change just to a kind of wizard-based approach, so people can see the normal workflows that you should follow when designing the SDMX structures, because it's an Excel workbook that's split into worksheets. Okay, so we'll see that, and it allows importing and exporting from the two files, and also now SDMX web services. So you can, in principle, create a DSD, design a DSD, and then upload this straight to the .stat data warehouse, okay, without having to go through the DLM interface. You may not always want to do that, of course, but you can actually do that. And you can actually pre-fill as well from the .stat data warehouse or the global registry. So you can pull in a structure and pre-fill the matrix generator. And it's applicable to all kinds of domains and structures. It's also used for the SDGs, but some other domains as well. Like I'm just putting it into the global labor DSD. Okay, so that's enough about just the tool itself. On using it to remodel tourism datasets. So just back to a bit of theory. When we start to remodel domain datasets, first of all, we look at the existing data. And for tourism, we analyzed 5 different tourism-related datasets. Okay, they're up there on the screen. And one of the things to do in these datasets is to find out what is the thing being measured. Okay, so there's 2 datasets here, key tourism indicators and domestic tourism. And we can see that in the existing structures, they have, one has a structure with a dimension called key indicator, and the other one has a variable. Okay, so, and this is one of the idea. Okay, so I'm just going to note notification. Okay, yes. Okay, so yeah, that's WebEx. Hopefully it'll stop popping up. So one of the ideas behind this whole harmonization and migration project is to align or harmonize our metadata, such as the concept names, okay, to move away from different things like key indicator and variable. So what we do is then we take all those indicators or things being measured from the analyzed data sets, and we put it into in a worksheet in the matrix generator called decompose indicators. And for each indicator, then we see how to kind of decompose that and see what concepts describe it. I mean, Anastasia has already described this, but let's have a look at that in the matrix generator itself. So if I just flip to that. Okay, so this is the tool. You can see it's in Excel. This is the first worksheet called pre-fill. Of course, we're not going to use that because the structures already exist in this workbook. So decompose indicators. This is where we're saying, okay, for this existing data set, this is an indicator, total domestic trips. And there's several characteristics inside this indicator name already. So how do we actually decompose that to make it filterable, to make it searchable, and basically to try to move away from a long list of indicators and to have a smaller list of indicators that have more breakdowns to make the filtering more successful. So in total domestic trips, we have, the unit of measure is number, the actual measure is tourism trips. Yeah, I'm not going to go into all of this, but you can see the various decomposition concepts, okay? And then you take the next indicator, overnight visitors, it's from the same data set, and you do the similar decomposition, okay? And you can see that almost everything is the same apart from the visitor type, okay? So it's overnight. Right, and then you do it for similarly for the rest of the indicators in domestic tourism. But because we're analyzing 5 different data sets, once you come to the end of domestic tourism, then you move on to the next data set and you do a similar exercise. So you say, okay, for overnight visitors in the inbound data set, then how do I actually decompose that that information? Okay. And we can see that a lot of the information is the same, but we've actually converted what exists now as a separate data set into a breakdown. Okay, so now we have this dimension called, or this concept called tourism form, and we're distinguishing from the domestic tourism data set. We're also trying to align this data set as well, by just having a different breakdown on it. So in the end, we may be able to reduce all our many data sets at the OECD and actually have kind of more kind of harmonized data sets that allow more kind of linkages between the data and more filtering and searching. Okay, so basically you continue this exercise until you've created the concepts for all of the information. So here you have a list of concepts, okay? And you can also see how the indicators are actually mapped to those concepts. And once you've done that, basically this gives you your concept scheme, okay? And these are all the concepts that you need to describe the data. And when you've done that, then you can click on this button, which will take you to the next worksheet, which is concept scheme. And it will fill out this list of concepts here, okay? And then you have to add information to those concepts. So I'll just go back to my slides because I'm maybe getting ahead of myself. So yeah, so as I said, you analyze each indicator. This gives you your list of concepts, and this becomes the concept scheme. I think this takes me to the next slide. Yeah, so you have a similar thing that I showed in the tool itself. So and then to move identify concepts from the decomposed indicators to the concept scheme sheet, this is where I said, just going back here, you click this button, and that's what does this step 1. It takes you to the concept scheme with this filled out. And then you need to assign a role to each concept. Okay, forget the DSDs for now, because it's quite crucial to think at this point that you don't have to think about what goes into each DSD. Okay, try to think first of all, what is the kind of the data universe? Okay, what are all the concepts we need to describe our data? And then the next question really is, what are the data flows that I want to create? How do I want to actually present the data? So here in the concept scheme, you would normally decide what is the dimension. Okay, so what is the dimension with a D? You have this little drop down, say whether it's a dimension or M for a measure, or various types of attribute. Okay, so we can see that we have attributes at the end and the attachment level and whether they're conditional or mandatory. Also, we need to describe if they are code lists. Okay, so reporting country, counterpart area, and ref area, they all use the same code list, or if they're uncoded. Okay, so something like time period is encoded, and the type for it is in another drop down here. You can specify which type you want. Okay, and for other uncoded things, you can specify any type. I think obs value we usually put to double, but you may need a different type for that. And then in the concept names, here we have the English description, but you can add others. So say, if I wanted a French description, then I'd add 2 columns for the French name and French description. Okay, and then I guess, and this information at the top is for the concept scheme itself. So if you're adding French concept names and description, you may want a French name for the concept scheme itself. Okay, so that's how to do that. Yeah, decided the concept is coded. Yeah, just done that. I've just described that. Yes. So if you say that it's a coded concept, which you do by putting CL and then whichever code you want to give it. When you click on this button here, it will generate a code list worksheet like these for all of the code lists that you've identified. And it will add all of the concepts to the matrix, which is the next thing that I'll show. And then it'll go to the matrix. Okay, back to the slides. Yeah, that just shows the kind of filled out concept scheme, which you've just been looking at. So filling the DSD concept matrix, which is the next part. So the button that I just showed, this is what moves the concepts from the concept scheme to the matrix sheet. And when we're filling the DSD concept matrix, what we do in the rows, we identify the data flows, which is how you want to visualize the data and the tables that you want to create. And we use a legend on how to do that. But this is described in the actual worksheet as well. So I'll show that. And then for each data flow, you can define the DSD structure that it belongs to, or that it's kind of related to. So let's have a look at this. So yeah, once I've got my concept, normally I click this button and it will fill out, it will take all of these and fill out the DSD concept matrix and put all the concepts here. Okay. So yeah, the idea behind the DSD DSD concept matrix is to design the data flows, basically. Is to say which concepts should appear on the data flows, and also create the relationship between a data flow and a DSD. Okay, and also to start defining how the concepts are constrained on the data flow. So it actually does quite a lot of things. So let's take a single row, like the first one. So this data flow, domestic tourism trips. So all of the cells that are filled in here under the concepts, this means that the concept is used. If you see a blank, it means that this concept is not used. So ref area is not used on this tourism trips data flow. But something like reporting country is, okay? Counterpart country kind of is, but it's set to not applicable, okay? So it's single fixed and not applicable. We can see that the measure concept, what this symbol means, a percent, is that a subset of measures is allowed for this data flow. Okay, so not all measures, not everything in the measure code list is allowed on this this data flow, but some part of it is. We have to define those later. I'll show you. So tourism form is single fixed to D, like domestic. Visitor type, the hash means like anything in the concepts code list is allowed. Okay, so it's unconstrained. And then you can see, you know, how the symbols are used similarly. Okay, so the main takeaway is that if there's something in the cell, it means that the concept is used on this data flow. Okay, so then let's have a look at another data flow like tourism key and tourism key. So we can see that different concepts are used on that data flow. Okay, so really the first thing to do in the DSD concept matrix is not to fill out the DSD column. Okay, first of all, it's to really fill out the data flows. Okay, so you think about all of the data flows that are required, the ways to present the data, and then you say, you know, which concepts should be used on that data flow. And you should really ignore the underscores as not applicables for now, because these are usually added in the end when you need, when you're deciding which data flow should belong to DSDs, okay? Because you have to fill a concept with something to align the data flows. So once you've described the data flows in terms of which concepts are used, then you can start saying, okay, how do we group these into DSDs? Okay, so we can see that in the current .stat, these may well have existed as 7 different data sets. Okay, but now we're saying, well, actually, it's better to group the data into 2 kind of data sets, okay, 2 DSDs. And this is how we've done it by using the single fixing and constraints. There's more on that in the user guide and in the just modeling guidelines in general, but I'm not sure if I've got time to go into it now. So from the DSD matrix, I've talked about that. And then updating the DSD and Dataflow details. So we've started filling out the matrix, but then we have to add more information to DSDs and data flows, like, you know, give them names. And we may also want to add some annotations to data flows to say how concepts should be visualized on those data flows. So we're coming back to Kamal's question, I think, and hopefully this answers it. Okay, can somebody trying to call me? Ignore. Okay. So right. So let's go to that. So first of all, the DSD worksheet. This is very simple. We just have to say for each DSD that we wish to use, what is the identifier Okay, so these three values: the ID, the agency, and the version, which is the identifier. Is it final? Well, if we're just working on the thing, then this should be false. And what is its name? Okay, and we may have like several names and descriptions for different languages, and then you just add those by duplicating that field and changing the ISO code. So that's DSDs. When you've done that, then you click on the button to go to data flows. So data flows is similar, but it has more things on it. So again, you have the identifier, okay, and whether it's final or not, and the name and the description, just like DSDs up to now. But you can also categorize the data flow. Okay, so in .stats, this is generally well, in the existing .stats, this will be like the theme tree on the left-hand side. Do you want it to be national accounts? Do you want it to be tourism? I guess here it will be tourism. Okay, which is I think what that category means. So this is it. How do you want to actually present the data set itself in a kind of like hierarchy or something? So this is the 4-part categorization identifier. And now we come to the annotations, and this will probably be a growing list. So layout row and layout column, hopefully they're just obvious what they mean, but all of the concepts that you wish to be on the rows by default, then you put them in a comma separated list. Okay, so here it's measure visitor type and accommodation type will go on the rows, and here time period and source will go on the columns. Okay, section is at the page level, not displayed actually, hides the concept from the presentation, and then default member goes into here. Okay, you can actually add annotations. So when the SDMX is generated, it will create an annotation. Okay, if you type in, I don't know, test or something here, and then give it a value, test concept, it will generate an annotation with that as a value. So just to say, you can actually add custom annotations, but of course, .stat has also got to be able to process that as well for the .stat system. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So I've described the categorization and the default layout. I think I described all of that. So I think that the main last part is defining content constraints. So, okay. So in the DSD matrix, I explained how things can start to be constrained in the DSD matrix. So if there's a hash in the matrix, they're unconstrained. Okay, so we don't have to do anything there. So for that, okay, it's unconstrained, but it's used. If they have if there's a percentage sign, this means it is constrained to a set. And this is where we've got some work to do to say, okay, for this constraint, these are the codes that are in the constraint set, okay, for this concept and data flow. Okay, if they're constrained to a single code, then yes, they go into the constraint. But if you use the buttons, then this should automatically be generated. The work that we have to do for a set, you shouldn't have to do it for a single code. So just to show you what I mean. So if we're going through this step by step, so we go to DSDs and then we go to data flows. Okay, so the button on the data flow step is to update the constraints and then go to code lists. Okay, actually I've got to show code lists as well. But so what that does is it takes the information in the DSD concept matrix and it starts to fill out the constraint information on the code lists. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean. I'll go to first code list, which is accommodation type. Okay, so this is the code list. Here's the header information for the code list itself. But then underneath, these are the actual codes. Okay, so it's quite a simple code list. We can see the codes themselves. It's got a simple hierarchy and the order. So actually, this is another annotation. So the order appears as an annotation in the generated SDMX, and .stat understands that and will order the codes in the Data Explorer. I'll come back to this annotation based on array, name and description. You can add other languages here. So in the constraints section, this is where we say we're going to define this constraint subset. Okay, so what we do is for each data flow and concept, it needs a column in this section. So we're saying we're defining the subset for the domestic tourism trips data flow, and the concept is accommodation type. Okay, so what codes in accommodation type can make up the subset? Okay, so when you define that subset, you put a 1 against all of the codes that make up the subset. So yeah, and it's all of them. Okay, so for accommodation type, everything is allowed. If everything wasn't allowed, then you may say, okay, well, private accommodation is not allowed in this subset. So for tourism trips accommodation type, everything is valid apart from private accommodation. Okay, let's have a look at another one. For the counterpart country concept for the tourism trips data flow. So what is a subset? So again, we just have a look in the column. If we go down, there's bound to be something. Yeah, okay. And well, it's set to not applicable. Okay. So why is it set to not applicable? Well, it must be so that we can put this data flow into the same DSD as other data flows that actually use counterpart country, but for domestic tourism trips, it's not valid. Okay, counterpart country is just not used, it's not valid. So I'll just show a quick last one. Okay, something here. Okay, here we can see where we've got several constraints defined in the tourism activity code list. So in this one, tourism trips and concepts activity, we say that the only thing allowed on that data flow is the tourism. Okay, and also for these other data flows, but for something like a tourism key, the NT tourism key, then all activities are allowed in the subset. Okay, and that's how to define constraints basically. When you generate them, then it updates this worksheet called constraint summary, which just gives an easier way to actually read what constraints apply to each data flow. So we can see that for domestic tourism trips, then these are all the concepts that are in the constraint. Okay, so accommodation type is constrained to this, counterpart country is constrained to that. It's like comma separated list. Okay, so let's define a concept constraints, and I think I talked about code lists. But just one more thing on the code lists. There's this column called annotations. Okay, so this annotations, it allows you to define any annotation for a code. Okay, where you can put a set of annotations for this code, and it uses the JSON syntax to do it. Which, yes, it's quite complicated. It's a bit complicated. It's in the user guide, how to do it. So you can just take the example there and adapt it. And it means that anything is allowed. You can create like 50 annotations if you want for this code. But it's a bit difficult to edit. So that's why the common request was to create order as an explicit annotation, because it's something that you may want to maintain all of the time. Okay. Actually, for order, I always tend to use multiples of 10, so you can always like fit things in. That's just a little tip. So generating XML and uploading structures and data to .stat suite. Well, yeah, I mean, data. The SDMX matrix generator doesn't do data; it does structures. So on the generate SDMX worksheet, once you've filled out all of your structural details, this is where you can say, okay, what type of artifact do I want to generate? If you want everything, then you just put a 1 next to everything. Here's the parameters for the generation, an output folder, or you can say generate straight to a web service endpoint, okay? Or both. Right, here's you say, do I want a file? Do I want web service, or both? Separate files if you're doing files. If you want to prefix several other things, and then you say generate artifacts. So I'll just generate it to a file. It hides the workbook while it's doing its work, just so it speeds it up. And then it says, okay, it's finished, and then creates the XML. Okay, so I'm certainly not going to show all of that, but just to prove, that's, or just to show that's what it does. You can also create a kind of dataset stub for testing, and then there's some other actions like setting everything to false or true, final status, and the agency as well. And there's like a log that's generated. Yeah, so you can generate a file and upload it through the DLN, okay, like this, or you can just generate to the web service itself and bypass having to go through this interface. So visualizing the data flows in .stat suite. So this is what it looks like, but if I click on this link, it should open it for me. This was all generated by Anastasia, by the way, so she did all the hard work. So there it is in Data Explorer, after it was designed in the matrix generator, and so you can see how it looks. Okay, anything else on this? So here is utilitarianism. Okay, well, I'm not sure that, but yeah, this is what the other data set looks like. Okay. And yeah, that's it, I think, from my side. But yeah, just say the matrix generator is an open source tool, so please, you can go to GitHub and get it and use it. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, David. So we've had one question posted in the chat. responded partially, so I don't know if you want to add something to my response there, David.
Okay, let me see. So it's from Jean Noel.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just trying to, can't see all of it. Okay. So the tool looks very nice. Will this be part of the backend administration of the .stat suite? If it's the case, will it be linked to the management and maintenance of the SDMX artifacts? Well, it's available now as a kind of open source tool on GitHub. Okay, so if you just Google for GitHub, GitHub SDMX matrix generator, you'll find it. And I mean, that's what it's for. It's for the maintenance and management and maintenance of SDMX artifacts. Now, it's not the only tool that can be used for that. I mean, and it's certainly not the first. It's it's designed to make a certain part of that easy. Okay, I mean that's really what it's for. But other tools can do that as well. So you should certainly have a look at the other tools, and they're listed on sdmx.org on the tools tab. So please see and compare it to other things as well, rather than just taking that as a default way of doing things.
Okay, thank you, David. Maybe stop sharing and I'll take it from here with questions. So Edgardo has a question. Edgardo from ILO has a question. Is or will it be possible to import a concept scheme to start editing from?
Yes, definitely. There's a pre-fill. If you open up the matrix generator, the first worksheet is pre-fill, and this allows you to import an SDMX file or from a registry, and that can be just the concept scheme, and it will pre-generate the concept scheme worksheet, and then you can go from there. And similarly with the other types of artifacts, if you just want to pre-fill like data flows or code lists, then you can do that.
Okay, I think that responds to your second question, Edgardo, which is import a DSD with references also.
Okay, so importing a DSD with references. Excuse me. I'm not exactly sure what that means, because it could mean several things. So, but perhaps we can talk about that separately, Edgardo. There may be something just missing, or it may go actually one step a bit too far for the matrix generator at this point.
And Herman has got a question. The code annotations are useful for defining presentation order of items only, or are there other applications?
Yes, so Anastasia mentioned full name. Okay, so full name is not something in .stat yet, but it's definitely on the list. So this is when you have a code list with several kind of total items in it, and you may want to give a better name for that to show in the Data Explorer. So this is something that you can actually define right now in the matrix generator by using the JSON column, okay? Because there you can provide whichever annotations you want, and they'll be generated in the SDMX. It's just that something like full name or whatever else, it won't be understood by .stat just yet, so it won't apply kind of processing to it. But at least you could start to define those things.
Okay, thank you. That's answered the question. We don't seem to have any more questions in the chat, and we have come more or less to the end. So, yeah, so thank you, David, for that. Just to close this webinar, I want to firstly thank all you, the participants, for joining, and also your questions, and also the presenters today for their excellent inputs and knowledge sharing, and all the material that will be made available afterwards and shared with you. Links will be sent to you shortly. And also we welcome your feedback. A short survey will be sent as well, just to get your feedback from this session today, just to understand and improve as we move forward. So thank you again, and we'll share the information shortly. Thank you.